Hello, welcome to our learning community talk this afternoon with Audrey Gilbert, Connor Flick, and Rachel Belin from the Kentucky Student Voice team. Today, the team is going to provide us with an overview on their organizing structure as a youth-led organization, how they conduct multi-generational collaborations, and their efforts to co-design more just and equitable education systems. After a brief presentation, I'll interview the team and incorporate the questions you pose in the Zoom Q&A function. And as I say, this is a pitch for you to join us live so that you can pose questions, and we encourage you to do so. We will, however, be recording today's session for people to access on Slack. On that note, we have some upcoming talks scheduled. The lead organizers of the Alliance for Quality Education, Zakia Ansari and Stevie Vargas, will be sharing their experience in community organizing with us on Tuesday, August 10th at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. They are working on the ARPA Action Accelerator, and a participating organization from the Whole Child Action Accelerator, Kauser Rosby from College Now Greater Cleveland, will be talking with us on Thursday, August 19th, again at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, about equitable design principles. And please continue to share your ideas and recommendations, suggestions with us on future talks. We have some others in the works, and we'll let you know about those when we talk to Ziki and Stevie next week. So now let me tell you a little bit more about the Kentucky Student Voice team. They are now in their 9th year as a youth-led program engaging in research, communications, and advocacy. And the Seek Common Ground team has a long and storied connection to the team. When the founding members of the Seek Common Ground worked at Achieve before spinning off or before founding Seek Common Ground, we met the founding members of the Kentucky Student Voice team in Kentucky. We did a workshop with them to help them develop their advocacy bona fides, if you will. We did some communications work and just some general advocacy consultation. After that initial session, we at the Seek Common Ground team, we really benefited from their partnership and fellowship, where they came and presented at our national meetings and really began a trend. They were the progenitors of a movement to include student voice in policy discussions. It's not ironic, it's a little perplexing that students didn't really have a role. Adults did not carve out a role for students to participate as direct stakeholders in discussions that impacted their lives most of all in terms of shifts in education policy. So we really credit the Kentucky Student Voice team for leading this movement. So that's a little bit of background. Oh, by the way, our Seek Common Ground's board chair is one of the founders of the Kentucky Student Voice team, Andrew Brennan. So we maintain a tight tie with that on that regard as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Belin in just a moment. I do want to note that the team have made themselves available for an overtime discussion where after the half-hour mark, we'll turn off the recording. And for those of you who can remain, we'll bring you up as panelists and you can have a direct dialogue with the team. So just wanted to set that context. And now I will hand it over to Rachel.
All right. Thank you so much for that intro, Michael. And thanks everyone else for tuning in today. As Michael mentioned, Rachel Belin, and I am the managing partner of the Kentucky Student Voice team. With me are my colleagues, Audrey Gilbert and Connor Flick, both Kentucky high school students, and one of them, actually, Audrey, is coming to us from her high school today because they start really early in some schools. in Kentucky. Though I'm the only legal adult on the presentation team, after my little intro here, Connor and Audrey will be leading this session with you. That is both because doing so will illustrate one of the key points in our talk today, and also because, frankly, Connor and Audrey can more than handle it. So what are we here to talk about today? In an exceedingly, for us, short amount of time, we want to inspire you to either affirm what you are already doing or to consider ways to collaborate with young people for education justice as an individual or as an organization that may already or may not yet be youth-oriented. To do that, Connor and Audrey will, one, establish some street cred as informed presenters. Two, define some key terms and models to help you consider student voice and intergenerational partnership and their relationship to each other. And three, share some ideas about how adult allies can best support students to push for education justice and more democratic schools and communities from our fieldwork in Kentucky. And with that, I'm consciously ceding the floor to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Rachel. And the title of the slide that we're on is Who We Are, but it may be more accurate to call it Who We Are Now, since we've been growing at a pretty radical pace ever since we established ourselves as a part of the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence. After 8 years there, we have recently, as of the last 7 months recently, spun off into our own youth-led independent organization. And now we are officially the Kentucky Student Voice Team. At any given time, our team is made up of roughly 100 Kentucky students, mostly high school age, along with many adult allies. And members are not anointed or appointed, but are self-selected. At the heart of everything that we do is listen to other students. Because we consist of only 100 or so young people, and because we tend to draw students who are successful in school or are relatively well-resourced, we know that our members themselves cannot possibly represent the entire Kentucky student experience. This is why one of our key strategies is to reach out to other students from all backgrounds in the form of student-to-student interviews and roundtable discussions, as we did with this recent immigrant in a Louisville high school pictured here on this slide. What we do with those voices and stories we collect is share them across numerous platforms, from social media and our blog and podcasts to op-eds, legislative testimony and policy reports, to even presentations like this in Kentucky and across the country. And now that you know a little bit more about where we're coming from, we want to delve deeper into the focus of our talk, all about how adults can help unleash the power of student voice. So let's start by defining what the term student voice even means. It means student voice is all about supporting students as active partners in our own learning and in school decision making. Underlying this definition is a basic understanding that there should be few decisions in education made about us without us. But it's important to note that not all forms of student voice are the same. We use this visual, loosely adapted from the students at the center, to help us distinguish meaningful student voice from more tokenizing or surface level forms, which can appear as students serving as rubber stamping roles or as visual aids to a predetermined and adult designed agenda. The power of student voice ranges from students serving as sources of information in the form of filling out adult-created surveys and sharing their experiences when asked an adult-led meeting, all the way to students co-designing activities and agendas or presentations as partners with adults or leading their own change efforts. Now I'll hand it off to Connor.
Thank you, Audrey. So as we look at this slide, it's important to think about what meaningful student voice is and how adult allies can support it, but it's important to think about how student voice can be used as a tool for equity and justice within our own school systems. It's not enough to just listen to students in a school system. In order to make sure that student voice truly matters and represents all students, we must also make the extra effort to hear every student, especially those that are going to be least heard in a school system, and make sure that these systems can respond to them professionally and accurately. We're talking about adults and other students being very intentional about making space for every type of student to make sure that they have a role in making real decisions about how schools may serve them. It's not just the difference here between equality and equity that we see on this graphic. It's the difference between equity, making these decisions and creating opportunities for individuals, and justice, really changing the system, making sure that everyone is truly on an equal playing field and that we don't need things like equality or equity to achieve our justice. As we look at this graphic once again, we also want to acknowledge that Rachel, Audrey, and I are all white, and we all come from very privileged and very high-ranking socioeconomic backgrounds. We're very conscious of this, and as a result, we're committed with the rest of our team for testing strategies that lift students from underrepresented backgrounds within our work, not only as the subjects of student voice, but as the leaders and co-designers of their school systems. Things like compensation, extra social support, and targeted project-based work are just a couple of strategies that we continue to test and refine when we're engaging students from underrepresented backgrounds. From the beginning, one of the most prominent ways we've been able to fully engage and sustain young people from less resourced communities in our work has been when we have adult allies working very closely with students in person and in coordination to provide an extra social connection as well. So we want to drill down on that last point a little bit more with these intergenerational partnerships. What exactly does student voice look like in the context of youth and adult relationships? This latter illustration is an adaptation of the widely known Hertz ladder from Adam Fletcher from Standout. It features a very clear hierarchy of the way student voice presents, and it privileges certain forms of student voice over others, not in regard to the level of agency that young people have, but also in regard to the role that adults play in ensuring and protecting that agency. In terms of intergenerational dynamics, the top of the ladder is where things start to get very, very interesting. According to Fletcher, when students are completely equitable with adults, the activity that they're involved in occupies the 9th rung at the very top of the ladder. Equity involves this uneven split when deemed appropriate by students and adults together. Students and adults, they fill different roles, and that's a-okay. Everyone involved is recognized for their impact in a given activity, including students and adults, and each has ownership of the outcomes. So when it comes to education decision-making, there are many, many potential spaces to unleash the promise of a meaningful intergenerational partnership. This slide captures just a sliver of these possibilities between the classroom, the school and district, and the community, and gives different examples of what that may look like. So coming back to another tree analogy, as if ladders and spectrums weren't enough and one more tree wasn't enough for you, we have another metaphor to absorb as we think about the relationship between student voice and agency with intergenerational partnerships. The idea here is that it takes time and it's a process to develop the capacities of young people and adults to work together as partners. It's not okay if young people start as recipients of adult organization structure and as consultants when adults ask for information, but it's developmentally necessary to make sure that it's a process and it's not something that just happens overnight. Getting to this partnership, getting to this collaboration between students and adults is something that takes time and energy and won't be something that just happens within 24 hours. It's a process and it takes time. So with that said and shown, we want to highlight a tweet from our co-founder and, as we mentioned, CCommon's board member, Andrew Brennan. He says, when adults say that they want to empower youth, they really mean they want to shift power to youth. What we're really looking at this is the idea of school districts and systems mentioning they want to empower youth and really have youth control and have the power. But oftentimes that means they have to relinquish some of their own power. And that's something that we really don't see with our own education systems. We're not shifting power. It's mostly meaningless hollow tokenism that we see when we're talking about empowering youth. We need to have equitable and really just school systems. And that means we have to shift some power away from adults a lot of the time. So with all that being said, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Connor. And now that you hopefully have a handle on what we mean by meaningful student voice in an intergenerational context, you're probably thinking, what does that actually look like? And what does it look like when we're unleashing it to create more just and democratic schools and policies in particular? We'll now give you 3 quick examples of what it's looked like for the Kentucky Student Voice team in action. As we whip through these next 3 slides, we want you to take note of a couple common elements. Each of these 3 examples that you're about to see include 1, students working as co-designers and partners with adults. 2, adults supporting students to shape the narrative, tapping into both their lived and expert knowledge. 3, the attention to equity and a focus on amplifying the voices of students least heard in our school system. 4, students and adults not awaiting a formal invitation to collaborate and act together. 5, rapid and reflective communication throughout. And finally, 6, adult support as needed or requested. So our first example is what we call the Powerball Promise. It comes from one of our biggest and earliest policy wins. Pictured here are members of our team testifying as a part of the campaign that we created to stop the practice of diverting state lottery funds from need-based scholarships in 2016. As a part of this work, we wrote op-eds and press releases and enlisted many adult partners. Specifically, that meant legislators, editorial boards, journalists, and policy groups. It wasn't long before the hashtag that we came up with, hashtag Powerball Promise, took off in ways that even we couldn't imagine. The campaign, which included a coalition of youth and adult-led organizations we enlisted, culminated in a giant rally at the Capitol Rotunda. The rally featured high school students and teachers sharing poignant personal stories about college affordability, and it was emceed by students sharing real-time data to put the problem into urgent context. The results took almost everyone by surprise. After nearly a decade of adult-led lobbying on the issue, an additional $14 million was finally moved back to Kentucky scholarships from the lottery to help an additional 8,000 students attend college, and a big and notably intergenerational legislative win. This second example showcases how we adapted our processes during the pandemic. In this case, and in the months after Kentucky schools shut down for COVID-19, we decided that as Kentucky students that were facing unprecedented challenges learning from home, we needed to figure out a way to capture and share what students were experiencing to shape education decision-making. And so we created a massive research study. Over 10,000 students from nearly every one of Kentucky's 120 counties responded to our IRB-approved Coping with COVID student-to-student survey. Among other things, we saw the response as a powerful testament to how much Kentucky students want to be heard on serious issues. As we continue to work with an adult team of academic research advisors, we continue to produce materials from what students have told us. And we have since shared the Kentucky student voices from our study with legislators, superintendents, education advocates, education researchers, mental health professionals, teachers, parents, and students in Kentucky and across the country. And we recently submitted our finding to a peer-reviewed journal. And for our final example we'll share today, it was so dramatic that even we're still processing it. The craziness began in late March when we learned that the night before the Senate Education Committee meeting that a bill was going to be introduced to remove the non-voting student and teacher positions from the Kentucky Board of Education. Within minutes, the Kentucky Student Voice team got to work, setting up a virtual war room and designing the hashtag Save Our Seats campaign. By early morning, our crew had developed a full-blown media campaign that we were ready to deploy the moment the bill was introduced the next day, while most of us were still supposed to be in school. Long story short, as soon as the amendment to remove the student and teacher representatives from the Board of Education was introduced, one of our members broke the story in her high school's student newspaper. The team then launched a petition to gather hundreds of signatures and testimonials from both adults and other young people, had quiet conversations with a number of legislators, ran op-eds and social media campaigns across the state, and put together a coalition with various teacher groups that brought widespread attention to the move. The substitution bill was ultimately removed by a conference committee when the House overwhelmingly rejected the change, and protection of the student and teacher seats was enshrined in law by the end of the session. Now back to you, Connor.
So if you haven't been thoroughly convinced by how intergenerational partnerships have been shaping education policy in Kentucky, we want to show you what the latest research shows on this issue. With our collaborations with Hallquist and Walls on this paper, which was actually published in the Sage Journal last week, along with us and an organ-based student voice representation, we found that 3 different key elements were needed to make sure that we have great intergenerational partnerships that really create policy change. First, adults that provide scaffolding and allow students to model traditional adult roles with facilitation and interaction with other adults and really creating network building are more likely to be successful than other groups. Additionally, successful adult allies often cede powers when students request them and when students are ready for it. Additionally, these students also found that to assist students in overcoming learned or previous helplessness, oftentimes created and unleash massive power between the students. And that conscious help that adults provide really lets students understand their own power when it comes to policy and government. Lastly, successful adult student voice allies demonstrate an ability to really help young people understand and navigate tokenism that we see day in and day out between legislative sessions and school districts, really by creating spaces for young people to process their own experiences and debrief on tokenism, and then push back against other adults that may want to tokenize them. So now that we flew through all of these examples and tips supporting intergenerational collaboration and shaping education policy very, very quickly, we want you to take away a couple things. Meaningful student voice is shaping education policy and being fueled by dynamic intergenerational partnerships today, and it's happening on the school, district, state, and even national levels. This type of intergenerational approach is what can push education systems to pay more attention to the people with the least power and the most at stake within our schools day to day. These intergenerational partnerships support meaningful student voice and requires the type of scaffolding and intentionality that ensures students from all backgrounds, no matter who they are, can co-design and contribute to their own education systems that they care about. And lastly, there's also this one thing. In our experience, 9 times out of 10, students and older people within and beyond organizations don't need to wait for frontal and formal permission to unleash student voice within their school systems. They can start co-creating and co-designing and getting to work today if they really want to. Ideally, these partnerships should be intergenerational and should be done in collaboration. And it can all happen right after you watch this video or once this meeting ends. And with that, I'll give everything back to C Common Ground and Michael for the Q&A.
Thank you, guys. And really, thanks for that. It was a really thorough overview of your work and really shared your principles and values with us. So we deeply appreciate that. I have a few questions. Oh, and I'd just like to remind the audience that the Kentucky Student Voice Team is actually conducting 2 projects with C Common Ground this summer simultaneously, one in the Measurement, Assessment, and Accountability Action Accelerator, and the other in the ARPA Action Accelerator. So I'm going to pose my first question to Audrey. Given the information you've shared about how you organize your work and your recommendations, as you reflect on the project that you are leading, which is in the MAA Action Accelerator, how does that reflect the values that you all hold?
I think I can answer this in 2 different parts. One, how I lead my team personally, but also how sorry, I've got the school bell in the background here, but also how our team is doing our project in general. So with our team, we are really looking to collect a diverse amount of voices. We want to get anyone who is interested in this process, regardless of the amount of experience they have, on our team. And then throughout, I am simply the facilitator. I'm not necessarily a leader of this project. I'm really a facilitator. I work alongside my team, and we enlist the help of other students, of some adult groups, things like that. But it's truly a collaborative process, and in no way, we have not really established any sort of hierarchy. And within our project, what we're doing, we are asking students to participate in roundtable discussions or interviews about measurement, assessment, and accountability, and just really share their thoughts on those things. After the really difficult year that we've had with COVID, testing and grading they haven't looked the same, and they honestly shouldn't look the same going forward. And we're seeing that reflected in a lot of the responses from Kentucky students. We're seeing what they think. We really are, again, looking to collect a diverse range of voices, and we want to hear from people across our state about just their general thoughts on this, because like we say, every voice in this situation matters, and we really just want to collect as many responses as we can get in order to fully understand the Kentucky student experience.
Thank you for that, Audrey. So Connor, I'm going to not ask you the exact same question. I'm going to incorporate some of the great questions that we've gotten in the Q&A, but sort of through the frame of what you're doing with the ARPA Action Accelerator, a couple points that I'm curious about is in your project, across your project, how do you work with students from across the state? How do you create that collaboration? Also, how do you build awareness how do you recruit basically members to participate?
Absolutely. So for the Kentucky Student Voice team, and I feel like for any organization, recruitment is obviously one of the harder things that you have to do. But one of the things that we really try to do when going about it is meeting people where they are and treating other people and other members with a lot of empathy and with a lot of care. And so what that really looks like is addressing different individuals' capacities, carving out different roles for students, and really trying to make sure that everyone can really contribute and collaborate in a way that makes sense for them and really plays to their strengths and plays to their skills and allows them to really learn and go through the process to make sure that we're all able to take something away from the project and uplift student voice in the process. And so when we try to get students from across the state, we really try to be intentional with selecting students from underrepresented communities and reaching out to them and connecting with those students to make sure that we're getting the full spectrum of student voice in Kentucky. So there's many different approaches to this, but one of the ways we really try to do that is through these intergenerational partnerships and connecting with adult-based organizations that have connections to students and asking them if they know anyone that might be interested, really connecting and just trying to understand what needs to be fulfilled and what students do they not typically see within student voice roles, and then going out to those students.
Thanks, Connor. So Rachel, as a consistent presence with the Kentucky Student Voice team over the history of the organization, what are some of the shifts that you've seen and that you've also explored in terms of how you conduct, how the team conducts activities? What's been the evolution of the Kentucky Student Voice team in a nutshell?
Do you want me to answer that since I've...
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was directing that to you. Sorry.
I'm so
Rachel.
sorry.
Thanks.
I didn't catch that. So there's been a massive evolution. We started as a program of a parent organization, the Partner Committee, for 8 years. We only spun off into independence this past January as a purely youth-led and adult-supported organization. So we've been trying to navigate what that looks like. But the evolution has looked like we now have a lot of very organically emerged youth-led project teams. And we're trying to build we're trying to build capacity in everything we do. We even are we do participatory action research has been a signature activity we do, like with the Coping with COVID study that the team talked about, but also we're trying to build a participatory budgeting model so that every student who's leading a project has their own micro project grant where they get to help determine student compensation and other programmatic needs. It's a little bit radical. We haven't seen fabulous models everywhere yet, and I'm sure they've got to be out there, but it's not stopping us from trying to make it happen anyway. And so we're seeing a very natural evolution of this work where youth are really stepping up. The other challenge for me as an adult is, my role is constantly shifting with the capacity of the group, and the capacity of the group changes is very dynamic year to year, month to month even, because students are growing and developing very rapidly. So it's a very interesting dance we're dancing all the time. But I think the key to everything is just all of us are just on a very steep learning curve all the time, and we're acknowledging that we're learning together, youth and adults. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. So I just have a closing question for each of you. You may have a hint of what it's going to be. I invite the audience to continue to stay on for overtime after we go through this rapid fire round of questions. I'm going to direct it first to you, Rachel, and I'll just go back around the horn. So who's been someone who influenced you, and why is that?
Oh gosh, there are a lot of people, but my original student voice type mentor is named Lynn Siegel. She ran a program called Children's Express, which became Y Press. It was a nationally syndicated youth-led journalism program. So I got the bug and the exposure at age 12, and I understood then the incredible cognitive dissonance between what students were capable of doing in the world and in our communities, and what we were expected to do in the classroom when we're asking for a bathroom pass every day. That was one of my originals. There are lots more since Lynn, but I'm still in touch with her, and I still use her as a mentor for me.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Connor, same question. Who's been someone who influenced you, and why is that?
So I'm going to take a bit of a different approach to this question. And I'm actually not going to name an individual, but I'm going to name a group of people that have really had an influence on my life. And that's a lot of the different teachers that I've had throughout my time in public school. I have been very lucky and very blessed to have a great assortment of public school teachers, and a lot of whom who have pushed back on traditional narratives of education and have really fought for students and have really put students at the center of their classroom and tried to uplift their own voices. And so seeing that, even before I joined the Kentucky Student Voice team, kind of put the bug in my ear of the idea that, you know, as a student, I should have a say and I should be part of my own classroom. And I should really be engaging and be able to influence what I'm learning on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Connor. That's really thoughtful. Audrey, same question.
Yeah, as the child of a former teacher, I've always been like in the face of education, but I noticed like that I didn't have a lot of a say early on. So I would definitely say my mom, as she was a former teacher, but of course Rachel as well. She has guided my student voice journey from the very beginning about 2.5 years ago. And yeah, she's been really helpful, and Andrew, of course, for starting the student voice team in general.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you. That was a wonderful presentation and a really rich, brief discussion as well. So we hope to continue that discussion in overtime. And thanks everyone for joining us for this formal part of the talk. And we'll see you over in the overtime.